If you're an intermediate to advanced Salesforce admin who hasn't yet discovered Salesforce Cloudflow, this video will show you how Cloudflow extends Salesforce configuration without Apex code. We've deconstructed an example that you can download from the AppExchange for free and modify for your own Salesforce org. Let's get started. Salesforce Cloudflow allows the automation of a business process with a series of steps, or wizard, instigated by a user action. Cloudflow steps and their connectors are built with a visual interface that does not require Apex. So when would you use Cloudflow? Cloudflow works well when you have a business process that is consistent with a wizard-type series of screens to capture responses, can't be accomplished with a workflow rule. For example, it crosses objects besides parent to child, and is initiated by an action the user takes. To download some samples, go to the AppExchange and log in and search for Visual to find the Visual Workflow Sample Pack. This is free and will provide you with several examples of what Cloudflow can do so you can practice updating them for your org. Click Get It Now and then choose the org. Agree to the terms and conditions and click Confirm and Install. You'll be prompted to log in again. Then, go ahead and deploy the components of the Visual Workflow Sample Pack. You'll be notified when the installation is complete. Once installed, you can view the components that come with the Visual Workflow Sample Pack. One of these components is the contact form sample. The contact form sample is a very simple flow. The contact form sample has a contact form screen to prompt for contact data, a record lookup to check to see whether the contact exists based on the contact data, a fault in case the criteria to move on in the flow isn't met, a decision as to whether the contact was found with the contact data or not, a record to create the contact if not already in Salesforce, and a contact end screen to thank the user for contacting the contact. We're going to build this exact flow, and you can refer to it from within your visual sample pack and build it or configure the existing flow for your org. Let's get started. To run Cloudflows, make sure you have the Force.com flow user permission enabled on your user record. Flow is under the Workflow and Approval section of the Create section. We're going to build the contact sample form. The first element in the contact form sample is built by dragging a screen element from the palette onto the canvas. When you first add an element or double-click it, its details open. First, we have to name the screen element. We'll call it contact form. This form was built by dragging text box fields from the Input section of the Add a Field tab. When the flow is run, these fields will accept input from the user, and the values will be stored in screen input fields. You could also create variables and store the values from the screen input in the variables. In order to run, a Cloudflow must have a designated start element. To designate a start element, hover the cursor over the right-hand corner of an element and click Set as Start Element. The next element in the example was built by dragging a record lookup element from the palette onto the canvas. In this case, we're going to look up to the contact standard object, and we're going to look for a contact whose email matches the email address that we created in the previous screen element. First name matches the first name we created in the previous screen element, and last name matches the last name we created in that element. When the flow is run, Salesforce will search for a contact record with values that match these three fields. Optionally, you can assign any field from that contact record, such as its ID, to a variable you also define in the record lookup. If you don't want to do this, remove this from the screen. Click OK. In order to connect the flow elements, click the diamond on one element and drag its connector to the next element in the flow to connect them. Next, we're going to add a decision element. Select the decision element and drag it from the palette onto the canvas. In a decision element, you specify the outcomes for the decision such that the flow branches based on which outcomes conditions the data in the flow meets. We'll call this contact found. For this decision, we're going to add an outcome of yes, contact already exists. In that case, the check contact record lookup will be equal to true. In the example in the Visual Workflow Sample Pack, the default outcome is named No, Create Contact. The default outcome is what happens when no other outcomes conditions are met in the decision element. You could also build the No Create Contact outcome as an editable outcome instead of making it the default outcome. To do so, you can select Add Outcome in the Editable Outcomes section and set the condition for the outcome that the value of the check contact record lookup element equals false. If you built the check contact equals false as an editable outcome, the default outcome would then only be reached when check contact is neither true nor false, which could happen if its value were null. The situation where the conditions necessary to move to one of the next elements in a flow are not met is known as a fault case, and we'll discuss these in a moment. Now we're going to connect the decision to the record lookup. The next element in the example was built by dragging a record create element from the palette onto the canvas. We'll call this Create Contact. Select Contact for the object that you want to create and assign previously gathered values in the contact form screen element to the description, email, first name, and last name fields for the contact you are creating. The connector from the contact found decision element is dragged to the Create Contact Record Create element and the flow prompts for which condition you want the flow to move to the Create Contact element on. We want to create the contact when it doesn't already exist, so we select No, Create Contact. The Yes Contact Already Exists condition from the decision is mapped to another screen element. We'll call it Contact End. It contains a simple message thanking the user for contacting the contact using the contact's first name. We'll call this Thank You, and this will be where we thank the contact directly using their first name. So I look up the screen input field of first name, and that completes the message. And this will be the Yes Contact Already Exists direction of the flow. The last element in the contact form sample is another screen element that serves as the fault element. As previously mentioned, this is what happens in the flow if the criteria to move on to the next step can't be met. It's helpful to include the fault message for the flow in the screen element so that if the flow hits the fault, This message will be displayed, including the error message for the flow. Now, we drag each element to the screen error, and if the criteria to move to the next element is not met, this screen error will be triggered and you will see the message why the criteria was not met. Now save the flow and you will activate it in order to run it. Once a Cloudflow is built, if you want to call it from a button or link in Salesforce, the flow must be activated. You can then use its URL from the Cloudflow detail page to build a button or link. Here's the contact form sample we built, and simply select Activate. When a Cloudflow hits a fault, you'll get an email from Flow Application. Sometimes these emails aren't delivered, especially when you've already received that fault error earlier that same day. That's why it's a good idea to build a fault screen element, shown again here, that includes the flow fault message. When you receive an unhandled fault email or message on your screen for your Cloudflow, look for the Caused By element and the actual error. Here, the Caused By element is the update element called Create Chatter Group. The upsert failed because the required field collaboration type was not passed by the upsert. Sometimes the errors are less straightforward. In the next example, it's not that there is something wrong with the SObject territory, but rather that the user running it did not have access to view all data for that object. However, you can still see which element caused the error and what Salesforce perceived the error was. This concludes our brief overview of Cloudflow. We looked at the different Cloudflow components. We built a sample Cloudflow that you can download from the AppExchange to check your work. We activated a Cloudflow, and we looked at some fault messages that you can get and how to troubleshoot those. Enjoy building Cloudflows. Thanks for watching this video on building a Cloudflow. We are MST Solutions. Come back and see another video soon.